leave that thought to yourself.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave that thought to myself. Actually, I don't usually like to do this, but I'm recording this for some people who couldn't be here today, so I'm gonna put it up on the Facebook page too. So if I don't, I'm not acting immobile today because of the knee, it's just because that way they don't have blank space to look at. And that probably would be better to look at than just me. But anyway, you got the sheets there before you, gender identity. And, if somebody would have said to me 30 years ago that we would be dealing with a topic like this in our society, I would have said, you're crazy. When you think of gender identity and changing one's gender, who's one person that comes to your mind? Bruce Jenner. Okay. And actually that's one maybe I could say it kind of surprised me a little bit, but if you ever watched the show on cable when it was on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, with the insanity that goes on in that family, I guess maybe it wasn't surprising. But anyway, this is something that's out there, and then again, it's hearing here a couple of weeks ago too that it's a topic that's come up in our own community as well. One of our moms had said that their daughter came home and said, "Mom, we got a little girl in class that's cutting her hair and wants to turn into a boy." How do you handle that with your kids? How do we handle that all together? I think it's good for us to have an understanding here. Now, maybe I'm just going to take a look at this here, and I've got some things here too. Maybe to start out before we start looking at the alphabet soup, are some things that I'll try to make a copy of for you before we start service this morning. There are some neat things that are out there to read about this, that non-religious sources, so to speak, some religious and some non-religious sources, to get a little bit of a grander picture of this. There's things available on the internet. I've got a couple of articles you can look up. One's called Gender Dysphoria, the Gender Dysphoria Fact Sheet, which comes from the American Psychiatric Association. Understanding the transgender phenomenon, how we made too much of gender, things in objections to transgenderism, what makes a woman, articles like that you might find interesting and informative. This isn't just a religious issue. Okay? This is also a medical issue as well. So looking on your sheet there, can you identify what each letter stands for in the following ever-growing list of acronyms? And actually, I shouldn't chuckle at these things, but you look at there and it's just ridiculous. LGB, lesbian, gay, bisexual. And then LGBT, transgender. You have LGBTQ thrown on another letter there. Yes, it is. It's queer. And that is a term of pride among the homosexual community. Really. It can stand for queer or questioning. It's kind of a catch-all for people whose gender identity and or sexual orientation doesn't fit into neat and tidy categories. That's about the longest acronym, this is about the longest the acronym is in most places where you see it. Then you have the LGBTQIA, intersex and asexual. This is where it gets interesting. Neither of these is inherently immoral. Intersex is someone born with sexual traits of both male and female. This is a reality in a fallen world. Someone who's asexual has no attraction to either sex. As discussed in Scripture, there's nothing wrong with this. Again, apples and oranges are lumped together. So one of the things that throws some confusion into this thing, there are actually, there's some of this, all of this, most of this stuff Scripture deals with. But again, here you have two things that really are neither are neither right or wrong depending upon how the person behaves. I don't know if you know anybody that doesn't have that doesn't have an attraction to either sex. But Scripture talks about that. We'll look at that in a little bit. The Apostle Paul deals with that in his first and second letter to the Corinthians, where he says that there are some that have that gift, but it's not widely spread. Let's throw a couple more letters into the soup. Throw on a P and a K. Any idea? It gets dumber. I want to, I don't want to sound. As we're dealing with these things, we want to talk and discuss about these things in love. It just sometimes it upsets me that our society just can't see the insanity behind some of this. P and K stand for polygamy. Okay, where there are people who actually advocate for many, or for more than one spouse. As I think all you women here can attest to today, why would any sane individual, sane woman anyway, want more than one husband? And any sane husband, what would we want? One's plenty to handle. And then the K, kinky. Yeah. Let's see here. Those dealing are those with an incredibly diverse set of fetishes and preferences. For obvious reasons, even the most vocal activists rarely let polygamy into the discussion. But it is interesting that you'll find the practice advocated in some places. Now you can even, and trust me, this is going to change. Even there's some talk right now, and and the reason maybe some things are not more publicized is because of the social stigma that comes with some of them. In the Roman Empire, it was common practice considered to be healthy sexual behavior for married men to have little boys as sexual partners. Okay? Pedophilia. There is a movement within within many societies today to legitimize pedophilia, saying that it is healthy for the child. There are movements in different places to lower the age of consent, and yes, there are groups like that within our own country. For some reason, the media tends to shy away from that. But considering that pretty much, if you want to call the moral level of our society today, pretty much considers that as it should be, to be a perversion and an evil, it's not talked about much. I'm surprised that they don't jump all over it, but they just seem to ignore it as stupidity, which it is. But let me tell you, it's coming. When I entered into the ministry 30-some years ago, I often told people in our Bible studies that the day was going to come in our country because of our low level of morals, that was something that was going to come up with it, and there will be a push someday for that to be legalized. Another thing, you don't get this. This isn't thrown in here today in the lesson anyway either. But you have bestiality, which is considered to be, which is considered, it's like, well, if people are going, if that's your thing, what's the problem? And that's been around for a long time in my hometown. Some people from my church that were hog farmers, that still are. Guys, friends I went to school with anyway. One day, my friend's mom, this was when I just entered the ministry, so this was back, in early 90s, late 80, 89, early 90s. Anyway, she comes home and she sees this strange pickup in their, in their farmyard. And they get the hog confinement, they get the hog shed out there. And she's kind of scared. She's afraid to walk into the house. Hi, Deb. She's afraid to walk into the house. And so she does the right thing. She goes to the neighbors and calls the sheriff and calls her husband. I can't remember where he was. But anyway, the sheriff gets out there. They go through the house. They can't find anybody. And the truck is still there. So they go around investigating, and they go into the hog barn, and they find this man in there in the pen with the hogs, pants down to his ankles and unconscious. Which, considering if you know anything about hogs, the fact that that man wasn't eaten alive right there was a miracle in itself. Anyway, they get him out. Long story short, this man had been paying visits to their farm for years to be intimate with the hogs.
I must have walked in at a bad time.
You did.
You got the interesting part.
And one thing I remember was my friend's mom saying, the sheriff told her, he said, this isn't the strangest thing I've ever seen. You look at it anyway. I don't want to beat one point to death. Number 2, each one of the issues represented under number 1 is somewhat independent and unrelated. What message is sent by continuing to group more and more of these sex and gender issues together?
Okay.
Anything goes. We were talking about, I'm trying to remember actually we went through some things pop into my mind because a couple of weeks ago we were going through this down in Brewster. Anything goes. Anything, as long, consenting adults, consenting people, whatever you want, they say that should be acceptable and good and healthy. I can remember being younger and having this type of philosophy, and I even said it sometimes in counseling sessions. What goes on in a married couple's bedroom really is their own business. And I'm not saying that it is anybody else's business, but after years more of doing marriage counseling and counseling couples, some of the things that I've discovered that can go on in the bedroom are not healthy and very damaging to the marriage relationship. And so just because it goes on behind closed doors doesn't mean it's healthy for the relationship. I had one young couple back in Minnesota that I knew really well, and when they were going through some trouble, the wife actually was coming in and talking to me and telling me some of the things that her husband wanted her to do in the bedroom. I spent a lot of time with him out in the boat and fishing, and he was wondering why she was having so much problem. So one time we're in the boat, and I was telling him, I said, what are you asking your wife to do? And he was telling me, and I said, think about this for a minute. I said, what you're asking your wife to do, you believe, is a sin for two men to be with each other. Oh, well, yeah. And I go, why would you ask your wife to do that then? I never thought about that. And I go, obviously you didn't. But I said, you got to realize this is an issue with your wife, and she doesn't consider that a loving action, and it's certainly not something that makes her secure in your relationship. I said, you know, you gotta, you know, that's the area right there. And once he got the idea, you know, once he got his head straight with some of those ideas, that was something that helped as well. Going on, how does the medical community define the issue? And you know, again, as I look at these things, sometimes it just seems stupid, but this is the society that we live in that is actually questioning common sense things.
I was gonna say, because, you know, like when the baby's born, they look
Yep.
at Colt and said, hey, he's a boy,
Yep.
you know? So why is there any question to, you know, now I get the ones that have both male and female parts. Those I understand, so those I can see where maybe there's an issue. But for everybody else, it's like you're either male or you're female. There's no doubt you can't
Yeah.
dispute it.
Yeah. Now, why do you think people would dispute it? You know, think about this. I mean, I think it's good to take some of these things and dissect it and try to fit, you know, and I'm not saying necessarily we're going to win some over, but sometimes it's good to understand or try to understand the insanity.
Also, that where the whole gender identity thing. I mean, you have your sexual organs that you were born with, but they classify your identity, your gender identity as
Yeah.
something.
And again, I think.
Ask that on like an application, I mean, that's not stated anywhere. It's like, I don't care what your gender identity is, I guess. I'm asking whether you're male or female, and that's it. If you're male, you use the men's room. If you're female, you use or we get rid of them all and you have a unit, and you have a bathroom that anybody can use.
Yeah. Again, but you know, when you're looking about this gender identity, just think about that term for a minute. What's the difference between, you know, think about this. What is the difference between sex, male and female, and gender identity? I will, but
Gender identity is what you feel inside.
one is what you feel, and the other is the facts. Okay?
Physical.
Physical, but it's the fact. I mean, you can't, I mean, it's right there, it's indisputable, okay? Feelings, this is one of the things that have gotten human beings into trouble since Satan was in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil talking to Adam and Eve, disputing the facts. All right? What did the devil say? Did God really say? Adam and Eve, or at least Eve and Adam was one with this. You know, and Eve stuck up right away. Adam, notoriously silent. Okay. Yeah, and you are right. You are right. That's the typical male tendency. And then, but it's to be quiet and then point the finger, which was what Adam did. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But here's the thing. This is one of the things you want to get down to Orthodox biblical Christianity. Fact always is to trump over feeling. Because when we start basing our life, when we start basing our beliefs, when we start basing our actions on feeling, there's all sorts of inconsistency. And feelings change. Facts don't.
We've had tomboys and maybe men that are, you know, not as male. I mean, we've had that for years. Why do all of a sudden we have to change their sexual?
Well, and you're right. That is a good point as well. And you know, think about this. Why do we have some of that? And it has always been. It had always been around. And you know, in my family, I have an aunt who she is now in her early 80s and has some health issues, but I still think she could kick my butt and most of the males in my family's butts if she really got mad at them. Built like a male, cuts her hair short like a male. She's married, had a family of 9 kids. Love her dearly. And tell you, growing up, never, when she told me to do something, it was, you did it immediately. Had an uncle. Never got married. Tended to be on, laid back, feminine, on the feminine side. Why do we have stuff like that? Why does it seem sometimes we have people of one sex that tend to lean towards the characteristics of the other? Any idea? Any thoughts?
So I think sometimes it's maybe a role model in their life, or maybe the father raised the daughter if she's more, and she was closer to her dad, so she wanted to go out, and do everything with dad versus staying in the house with mom.
I think there's many different possibilities. You can go with the nature versus nurture thing. We'll sometimes learn behavior, personal preference. But what it comes down to is we have to remember. Let's go back and to do a quick review here. After God created the universe, the world, He created Adam and Eve, and we get to Genesis chapter 3. And at the end of day number 6, we're told God looked at everything and saw that it was very good. When God got done creating man and woman, all the animals, everything in this universe was perfect. There was nothing wrong with it, not one thing. Everything was great. Everything was working the way it was supposed to be. All of that changed after Adam and Eve fell into sin. Okay? So now, this is one of the things that we shouldn't be surprised at when we don't see things working the way they're supposed to, because we live in a world that is infected by sin. Sin that comes maybe through learned behavior, and sin that can come through, even if you want to call it, through physical or mental defect. Yes.
What about what they claim is the chemical imbalance? And so I've heard that.
Okay.
So they can't help it.
Okay, and usually that's always been one that's been thrown around for if you want to call alternate sexual behavior for the last 3-4 decades. Okay, I can't help it. I was born this way. Okay, let's look at it. Let's look at it this way. I'm not a medical expert. Okay, and I'm not going to deny that there can be some physical, medical, psychological reasons why people might have some deviations in that area. But let's take a look at it. I was made this way. I was born this way. Other people will go so far as to say, and maybe some people mean the same thing by this, God made me this way. Okay? Well, how did God make me? Okay, first of all, we have to remember how God, once He created Adam and Eve, male and female, and so forth, and created all of that, it was very good. Sin has had negative effects on some of that, on a lot of it. So, we have to remember God did not make it that way. God did not make them that way. One may have been born that way, but it doesn't give any human being the right to act against God's commandments, against God's will. Let's take this reasoning. It's one I've often thrown out my whole life. God made me a heterosexual male. No disputing that. Since God made me this way and I was born that way, that means that I can go and bed any woman I want whenever I please. No. Because God has made us heterosexuals and we have that doesn't mean we can go off and do what we want. and act again contrary to God's will. You know, another thing that comes out with this, God just wants me to be happy. Okay? Kind of we had that in the sermon last week. God does want us to be happy. Okay? But his definition of happy is 180 degrees in opposition to our definition of happiness, or to our sinful nature's definition of happiness. And how often do these people that act according to their feelings say, this is what makes me happy? Are they really happy? Are they really healthy? Are they really content? And and when you get into the psychological side of it, where there are plenty of legitimate doctors and people in the medical field in these areas, they call these things. One of the things is it's a dysphoria. Is a medical term and a psychological term that they use for it, and it's unhealthy. And these people aren't happy. Think about it even in other areas. Think about it with the drug addict and the alcoholic. This makes me happy. What they're trying to do is fill a void. And the void doesn't get filled. They think that the drugs or the alcohol does it, but when that effect wears off, the void comes back and it's often bigger. And it's the same here too in the sexual identity and the sexual behavior area. God knows how to make us happy. And again, once again, what did the devil come when that first temptation to Adam and Eve is? God's holding something back from you. God doesn't want you to be happy, but I do. And we see how happy God made Adam and Eve. Probably Adam and Eve, not because they weren't forgiven, and trust me, they clung to that and they cherished that from God and clung to the promise of the Savior. But talk about a pounding conscience from only two people who knew by experience what perfection was and lost it. They knew what happiness was, and they lost it. Let's match some of the following terms. Sex. Letter D. The biological classification of male or female, determined primarily by chromosomes and reproductive organs. The facts. The physical facts. 2, gender identity. G, which would be one's identification as male or female or something else. It does get that crazy. If you catch up on your news and current events on your computer, comes up on MSN, NBC or whatever your search engine is. I've seen things as dumb as people identifying as cats, as different kinds of animals, physical surgeries to alter their appearance. It gets this out of line. Determined by personal perception and cultural expectations. Transgender. E, someone whose sex and gender identity do not match. I've never heard of term number 4 until now. And I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. Cisgender, that would be my guess. Someone whose sex and gender identity match. That would be the facts. Transsexual. F, a transgender person who seeks to make his or her sex and gender identity much through medical intervention, such as hormonal treatment and surgery. Crossdresser. A, someone who occasionally wears the clothing of the opposite sex but does not wish to permanently change his or her sex. C is number 7, intersex, an individual whose sex at birth is unclear, possessing anatomical traits of both sexes. And I think that the previous term for that was hermaphrodite. Maybe they changed that because hermaphrodite, somebody thinks that doesn't sound very nice. I don't know. Looking at these different, how the medical community defines these issues. You watch TV, don't you? Have you noticed how much of this stuff gets depicted in programs? Depicted as normal behavior?
It's kind of like, started out small, so they keep beating the drum about it.
Yep.
And the medical profession, some of them that are into this change stuff, well, the more they beat the drum, the better advertising is for them.
Yep.
So they got people coming in by the hundreds now to get their sex changed.
Yep.
It's a big money deal for them.
And again, our society, and many, not only American society, but many societies today are sexually twisted. Okay, this was quite a few years ago, probably maybe almost even 20 years ago. It was a Friday evening, and I was with some of my friends, these husbands and their wives and their kids. We decided to go out for supper one night. It was a Friday evening in Sioux Falls. We went to a place in the Empire Mall that isn't there anymore, Shenanigans Pub, a nice little family-oriented restaurant and bar. We go in there and we're eating, and this is like about 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, and there's a whole bunch of people. They were busy in there that night. And all of as we're visiting, and our meal's not even there yet, and all of a sudden we hear this ruckus going on, and there's cheering. Well, here, standing up on top of the bar, are 2 very attractive young ladies kissing, standing on top of the bar. Okay? And anyway, as the bouncers and the bartenders try to come, or actually the bartenders didn't try to break it up, the bartenders tried to come and break that up, and the crowd kept them from coming in to do that. And as it got more and more vulgar, finally, I said to one of my buddies, I said, "Do you really want your kids standing here watching this?" And he goes, "Not really." And I said, "Then let's get out of here." This was 20 years ago. And it was something that the majority of the crowd in that place, in this family establishment, thought that was just wonderful. And some of that, I was just happening to see something on TV the other day where somebody that was transgender, or acting as transgender in the program, somebody who was heterosexual was having a relationship with them and didn't see any issues with that. Now, I will say this. One of the things with all of these sexual perversions, and if you want to look at homosexuality, and you look at how much this is getting publicized on television and promoted, this is a small percentage of the behavior of society. Now, what I mean by that is that it is not as prevalent in everyday life as the television and the media like to promote it. It is the percentage of this, whether you're looking at homosexual behavior, transgenderism, whatever this is, the percentage of people like this are really, and some of it is growing, but it's really under 3% of the American population. And you notice how we're being told that it's a large group, and it's really not. That doesn't look right to me. Oh, there, that's because it's not. Number 8. On the next page. 13, the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, well, that's a mouthful, reclassified gender identity disorder as gender dysphoria. Dysphoria is defined as an emotional state marked by anxiety, depression, and restlessness. In other words, the problem, as the medical community defines it, is not an individual's identification with the gender opposite their sex per se. The problem is the emotional and functional challenges that accompany this identification. What implications does that change in designation have?
Back to that emotional part of your feelings.
Yes. And have you noticed today how much feelings have taken precedence in our society today? Well, that made me feel bad, and so now we have safe spaces where people don't get their feelings hurt, and all of this, and so where it becomes feelings become the predominant thing over fact. You know, and I'm trying to remember who said that. Can feelings be hurt? One can have feelings, but how can feelings be hurt? I may feel bad about something, but one, you can't hurt, I mean, feelings are not something that are concrete or physical. And I'm not saying that we don't, I mean, these aren't excuses to not be, or to be hateful, to single people out. But again, that idea, how many, I can't tell you how many problems have been caused between individuals, husbands, wives, other people, and especially more in society today where, oh, my feelings are hurt, and that's usually the trump card that's laid down for one to get one's way, right? No matter what the facts say. In our university system today, I mean, where they've got, in a lot of places, they've got safe houses for kids to go to so they don't get their feelings hurt if there's something political going on. We want to be nice, we want to be loving, we don't want to do mean things to people, but this thing where my feelings get hurt. You know, what do you tell your children? I mean, and don't get me wrong, I mean, you've raised children. How many times when you were raising your kids were they upset because their feelings were hurt? You were sympathetic, you loved your child, you wanted to make things better, but you also realized too that while you sympathize with those hurt feelings,
They're still around.
Yeah.
You just have candy for supper.
Yep. You know, and my mother was a very kind, compassionate, loving mom, but you know what? She didn't tell me anything differently that my dad did. And my dad's favorite line to me was, "Suck it up, buttercup. Life's not fair." And he said, the sooner that you come to realize that, the happier you'll be. I didn't like that. That hurt my feelings too.
No, we don't.
But you know what? It was a good lesson. You know, we want to, we want to be, you know, and sometimes, you know, and there's a difference between being nice and being loving. Okay, a lot of people think that, you know, well, being nice. A lot of times, being nice is telling people what they want to hear so they don't get their feelings hurt. Loving is telling the truth because that's what's best for that individual. Speaking the truth in love, and that's not easy. Okay, it's not. It's not comfortable. You know, usually when my wife has to straighten me out, I know that that's not a comfortable thing for her to do. She loves me, but the reason she says it to me is because she loves me. So again, it comes back to this feeling versus fact. Now, let's take a little bit of a look at going on and start out here and take a look at what Scripture says about the issue. We're going to take a look at one before we break here. I'll hand out a couple Bibles. It should be right on the first in Genesis. It should be right. Genesis 1, verses 26 to 28, I think it says there. And as you're looking that up, it should be almost right on page one.
First page, yeah.
First page. Those supportive of the transgender movement talk about a person's assigned gender, the designation of a gender of male or female at birth. According to Scripture, God is the one who assigns us our gender. He made them male and female. With what characteristics does Scripture identify a person's gender? Would somebody read those three verses there, 26, 27, and 28?
I don't have my glass.
I don't even.
Right.
Here, I'll hold it open for you.
Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them.
Thank you.
Is there one more?
One more.
And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on earth.
Thank you. Very specific there. Let's just take a quickly just break this down a little bit. God makes them male and female. Two characteristics are associated with that gender identification. The first, and we see this here in the text, is complementary sexual organs. Verse 24 there says, they become one flesh. That's what that means. The pieces were designed to fit together.
And that's kind of what I always go back to, couples that want to have a baby. Well, you can't. So what does that tell you?
Yeah.
If that's not the natural way it should be. If
Lesbian
two
couples.
men can't
Yeah.
have a baby together, and it has to be there, they have to have a female. To me, that was like the most logical thing. Like, you can't have a baby.
And like you said there, the second is the ability to reproduce.
Great, but you can't do it if you don't have a female.
Physically possible.
As originally intended, there are two genders, male and female. At least part of what defines them is their ability to have sexual intercourse and bear children. Scripture has relatively little to say about other defining characteristics of male or female, dress, hairstyle, things like that. Even the specifics can probably be dismissed as culturally specific rather than pertaining to all people of all time. Let's see. In contrast, sexual organs and reproductive ability are tied explicitly to the identification of one's gender. Now, just as in a perfect world, people would always have physical attractions to the opposite gender, so also in a perfect world, people's gender identity would also match their sex. However, just as in a fallen world, people have physical attractions to the same gender, so also in a fallen world, people of a particular sex identity identify with the opposite gender. Just as in the discussion about sexual orientation, the origins and causes of such attractions can be debated. Nature versus nurture. I was born this way. This is a choice. And you know what? All of them are used. So also in the discussion about gender identity, the same thing can be done. However, rather than dismissing or minimizing this challenging issue, we will seek to help him or her deal with it in a God-pleasing way.
It all falls back to that feeling thing.
Yep.
You know, I'm not a physical attraction to another woman, okay? I can't help my feelings, but I don't have to act upon it. And I can do something to, you know, to pray to try to get those feelings to go away. I mean, again, I think it's all about their feelings. They're selfish. Our world is so selfish that we just...
Something to keep in mind next week. And again, because I think it's something, Jesus says it comes from the book of Proverbs, if my mind serves me correctly. We reap what we sow. And our society over the years has used these excuses for promiscuous heterosexual behavior. And because for years society looked at that as in general, Christians, we reap some of that, and we're seeing some of that, or reaping some of that now today. And again, how do we deal with this in a loving way? And we'll come back and we'll look at some of these things too. With how does a mom and a dad help their child how to deal with this? Who comes home and says, "Mom, Dad, Mom, there's this little girl at school that's cutting her hair short and wants to become a boy." Or even where it hits home even more, what do you do if you come home, if your kid comes home and tells you that? Or your grandkid, your kids come around with your grandchildren, and you hear your grandchildren and the family's talking about this. How do you deal with it? And this is where things get intricate. This is where things get testy. This is where things maybe things even get heated. How do we speak the truth in love? And we'll look at that. One of the things that we have to keep in mind with this, and I'm speaking to my own sinful nature with this, I have a tendency, and men often have a tendency to do this. Women a lot of times have more patience with this, but we'll see some things and we think, I got to fix it right now. And we push, and sometimes we put the cart before the horse. And we have to realize that this is something that didn't come on suddenly, and you're not going to be able to fix it suddenly. Patience is one area, and it's one thing in this area that can be and is a blessing. And letting God use His timetable and His word to fix things, rather than I try to be God and determine how this is going to go forward. But we'll come back and talk about that next week. If you want to take your sheets with you, you can. I'll have plenty here. If you want to leave them here, that's fine too. But thank you. And so we might not even finish with this topic next week. But if you miss, I'll be recording.